When an elderly man drives up to an upscale valet stand in a beat-up car, young valet Kevin can't resist mocking him, treating the man and his vehicle with clear disdain. But when a black limousine pulls in shortly afterward, and a well-dressed executive steps out, Kevin's arrogance quickly fades. The executive approaches the elderly man with deep respect, addressing him as Mr. Collins, the owner of the entire parking company. As Kevin realizes the true identity of the man he ridiculed, everything changes. The revelation that follows leaves Kevin rethinking his attitude, and it will have consequences he never anticipated. But before we dive in, leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. In the upscale neighborhood of a bustling city, the luxury high-rise known as the Lexington Tower stood tall, its entrance constantly adorned by the comings and goings of high-end vehicles. Bentleys, Porsches, and Lamborghinis rolled through the valet area, their glossy finishes gleaming under the bright lights of the grand portico. Amidst this parade of luxury, Kevin, a young valet in his early 20s, stood with a smirk on his face. He took pride in his job, enjoying the rush of handling such expensive cars, albeit for just a moment. Kevin adjusted his tie as another sleek black car pulled up to the valet. He straightened his back, his eyes widening slightly at the polished Porsche that came to a smooth stop. He nodded approvingly at the driver, a man in a sharp suit, who tossed him the keys with a smile before heading into the building. It was late in the afternoon when Kevin spotted a peculiar sight, a beat-up old car pulling into the driveway. The car was an eyesore among the gleaming luxury vehicles that adorned the parking area. Its paint was chipped, a side mirror hung by a thread, and a noticeable dent marred the rear door. The engine let out a groan as the car slowly came to a stop in front of Kevin. Kevin couldn't help but snicker. Who would drive such a wreck to a place like the Lexington Tower? The driver's door opened, and out stepped an elderly man, his hair a shock of gray, his clothing simple, a worn sweater and faded jeans. He looked completely out of place among the sharply dressed clientele that usually frequented the building. "Hey, kid," the old man said, his voice kind but firm. He held out the car keys, his eyes twinkling with a sense of warmth. "Would you mind parking it for me?" Kevin's smirk widened, and he let out a small, mocking laugh. "Are you sure, old man? I don't think we have a spot for, this kind of classic," he said, sarcasm dripping from his voice. He looked around at the row of luxury cars, then back at the beat-up vehicle, shaking his head. A few other valets nearby snickered at Kevin's comment, their eyes fixed on the interaction. The old man raised an eyebrow, his expression calm. "It might not look like much, but it still runs fine. Just needs a good spot," he said, his voice unbothered by the young valet's mockery. Kevin shrugged, taking the keys without even trying to hide his grin. "All right, Grandpa. I'll see what I can do," he said, slipping into the driver's seat with a dramatic sigh. He started the engine, the car rumbling noisily as he drove off to the far end of the parking area, where the least desirable spots were located. He parked it hastily, leaving it squeezed between two dumpsters, its dented door barely a foot away from a wall. Kevin laughed to himself as he walked back to the entrance, tossing the keys to one of the junior valets. "I doubt he'll even notice where I parked it," he said, still amused. Half an hour later, Kevin was standing by the valet stand, chatting with a fellow valet when he noticed the elderly man returning. The old man approached Kevin, his gaze calm, and held out his hand for the keys. Kevin fished them out of his pocket, smirking as he handed them over. "Your car's all set, old-timer. Though, with that piece of junk, you might want to think about an upgrade." The elderly man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You know, son, I've had that car for years. It holds a lot of memories for me," he said, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. Kevin just shrugged, his smile indifferent. "Whatever you say, old man." But before the elderly man could say anything else, a black limousine pulled into the valet area, its tinted windows gleaming under the evening lights. Kevin and the other valets immediately straightened up, their eyes fixed on the car. This was the kind of vehicle they were used to handling. Luxurious, powerful, a status symbol. The back door of the limousine opened, and out stepped a well-dressed man in his late 50s, his suit crisp and expensive. He adjusted his cufflinks as he looked around, his gaze scanning the valet area until it landed on the elderly man. "Mr. Collins," the man called, his face breaking into a smile as he approached the old man. Kevin's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Collins?" He watched as the well-dressed man hurried over to the elderly man, extending his hand respectfully. "Mr. Collins, it's so good to see you," the man said, his tone filled with admiration. "I didn't expect you to drop by today." The elderly man, Mr. Collins, smiled warmly, shaking the man's hand. "Ah, Robert, it's good to see you too. I thought I'd come by and see how things are running." Robert nodded, then turned to Kevin, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Is this the young man who helped you with your car?" he asked, his tone shifting, a sharp edge creeping in. Kevin felt his stomach drop, a sense of unease washing over him. Yes, sir." "I helped him park his car," Kevin said, his voice lacking the confidence it had held earlier. Robert's expression hardened, and he looked back at Mr. Collins. "Mr. Collins, is everything all right? Did he treat you well?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Mr. Collins glanced at Kevin, his eyes unreadable, before turning back to Robert. "Well, let's just say I wasn't exactly given the warmest welcome," he said, his tone light but carrying a weight that made Kevin's heart pound. Robert's expression darkened, and he turned back to Kevin, his voice firm. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Kevin swallowed hard, his face paling. He shook his head, his earlier arrogance replaced by a growing sense of dread. "No, sir," he managed to say. "This," Robert said, gesturing to Mr. Collins, "is Mr. Henry Collins. He owns the entire Collins Parking Company, the very company you work for." Kevin's heart sank. He stared at Mr. Collins, his mind racing. This old man, the one he had mocked, the one whose car he had carelessly parked, owned the entire parking company? Mr. Collins looked at Kevin, his expression thoughtful. "You know, young man, I've been in this business a long time," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've met a lot of people, seen a lot of things. And one thing I've learned is that you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat others, especially those they think are beneath them." Kevin felt his cheeks flush, embarrassment washing over him. He opened his mouth to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. He had been so focused on impressing his peers, on mocking those who didn't fit the image of wealth and success, that he had completely disregarded the importance of respect and humility. Mr. Collins continued, his gaze steady. "It's easy to treat people well when they're driving a fancy car or wearing an expensive suit. But true character is revealed in how you treat people when you think no one's watching." Kevin swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the ground. I'm so sorry, Mr. Collins. I didn't know," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Collins nodded slowly. "I believe you, son. But the thing is, you shouldn't need to know someone's status to treat them with respect." Robert, who had been standing silently, finally spoke up. "Mr. Collins, what would you like us to do about this situation?" he asked, his tone respectful. Mr. Collins paused for a moment, considering. He looked at Kevin, his expression softening slightly. "Everyone makes mistakes," he said. "But it's what we do after those mistakes that define us. I think this young man deserves a chance to learn from this." Kevin looked up, his eyes filled with hope. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. I promise I'll do better. I'll treat everyone with the respect they deserve." Mr. Collins nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I hope you do, son. And remember, it's not about the car someone drives or the clothes they wear. It's about who they are inside." As Mr. Collins and Robert turned to leave, Kevin stood there, the weight of what had just happened settling over him. He watched as Mr. Collins climbed into the back of the limousine, Robert closing the door behind him before getting into the front seat. The limousine pulled away, leaving Kevin standing alone in the valet area, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath, his mind replaying Mr. Collins's words over and over again. He knew he had been given a second chance, a chance to prove that he could be better, that he could treat others with the respect they deserved, regardless of their appearance or status. And he wasn't going to waste it. Kevin turned back to the valet stand, his posture straighter, his expression more serious. He knew he had a lot to learn, but he was determined to change, to become the kind of person Mr. Collins would be proud to have working for his company. As the evening wore on and more cars pulled up to the valet, Kevin greeted each driver with a genuine smile, his tone respectful and warm. Whether it was a sleek sports car or a modest sedan, he treated each vehicle with care, remembering the lesson he had learned that day. And though the other valets watched him with curiosity, Kevin didn't mind. He knew that real change started from within, and he was ready to make that change, one car at a time.